Well, welcome everybody. I am Robert Brandon, Executive Director and Farm Manager here at New Water Farms. We're excited to have you here. This is a great uh, day for us to gather together and talk about things that are important like soil and health and soil health and food. And we've got a great speaker, so we're going to kind of go quickly through the New Water part because I want to give plenty of time to Chandler. But thank you guys for coming out. It's really special, I think, always to gather with friends and new friends and people who are interested. I just encourage you to lean forward into this presentation, and there's always lots to learn. Some of it may feel a bit like drinking from a fire hydrant, but there's just, yeah, so I think I just scared everybody on Zoom. So anyway, let me open with a word of prayer, and then we'll dive into our presentation. Father, we thank you for the gift of this beautiful day that you've given us, and you've allowed us to gather together, both remotely across the globe and in this space called New Water. Thank you for those who traveled and given up part of their day to join in the conversation about agriculture and living soil and how to make things better, not just for ourselves, but for our communities. So bless our time together. Help us to learn. Thank you for those who will share. And again, we just give you all the glory in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are the 360 Living Soil Alliance. And Allie, if it's okay, I messed up already. I'm skipping your video. So let me go backwards. Sorry, guys.
We're on time.
Well, this is from Allie. She'll introduce herself here.
Good day, everyone. I'm Allie Baumeister. My family and I operate an independent humanitarian volunteer group that we call the Enduring Empathy Project. Basically, we ask how can we help to anyone who shows up with a concern, a question, or a challenge. While much of our time is focused in Central America, where we travel between jungle villages supporting people in pain, with pain and injuries, we have also had hundreds of conversations with farmers around the world about everything from their health issues to difficulties with their farm. Almost every farmer I've spoken to has an overlap of the same troubles. Their expenses of both time and money are high. Their revenue comes under various and sometimes unknown threats, and the wellness of their plants needs nearly constant attention. Many farmers have heard about the health concerns directly associated with what they spray on their crops, but without a clear path forward, they will repeatedly use those products until they find a better way. They will prioritize buying these products only because it's a system that they recognize and they know how to use, even if it doesn't support the majority of their long-term goals. Because farmers have to do whatever it takes to keep their yields consistent so they can accommodate their expenses throughout the seasons, and because they usually have sunk a lot of time and money on equipment and materials, making changes to their setup feels like an overwhelming challenge to many. My job has been to help them find a better way forward with a do what you can with what you have where you are perspective, and I try to step into their shoes and recognize the lived experiences of their day-to-day life. We focus on natural and locally available materials to replenish and stabilize the soil, and form solutions based on what individual farmers have tangible access to. We create customized approaches that help develop better balance in their farming practices. When I learned about the three-product system that this network is currently experimenting with, it piqued my interest, primarily because it is by farmers for farmers. It is addressing the needs of the soil and the plants and encouraging better immunity for the entire farm. And it can be fine-tuned to address unique challenges instead of pursuing outright eradication, which tends to be more expensive and causes a lot more problems. And it fits into my desire to support the wellness of farmers, families, and communities by offering practical guides for farming in a more responsible and plentiful manner without disrupting their routines or needing new equipment. Your farm is a complex and alive piece of the planet. It doesn't only bear your name, it bears the results of generations of farming activity, often where only one type of crop was present at a time. This form of farming is referred to as monoculture farming. And while it has been the backbone of America's farming industry, it's causing a lot of challenges for the farmers who use it, and for the environment around them. Because this type of farming depletes nutrients from the soil, we've done crop rotations, sprayed fertilizers and nutrients, we've met swarms of pests and imbalances, and primarily all of this is because we just don't have the biological components to help keep those factors in check. Through my research, I've discovered that plants which have a regular source of nutrients have a healthier immune system. Much like humans, having their health needs met is equal to having stronger health. With good health, these plants are capable of living more harmoniously and responding to biological threats in effective ways that keep these threats in greater balance. These plants also produce higher yields and healthier, more nutritious produce. So the question for me becomes, how do we create healthier farms while still utilizing systems that farmers understand, which are convenient, accessible, and will not only ultimately save them money, but will minimize their need for endless products and expenses or unhealthy temporary solutions? I believe this network is addressing this question head on. Utilizing the current practices most farms in America are already accustomed to, the agri-harvest system harnesses the immense benefits of magnesium hydroxide in nanoplatelet form, alongside NutriPlant 643 and deer repellent. It supplies a robust 360-degree support system to your plants. This setup aims to create better balance in your plants and soil. It allows for the use of your current equipment and protocols and decreases the need for harmful additives while increasing the 360-degree health of your pots, fields, and orchards. While we won't make promises that you'll never again have troubles, we do believe that by engaging with our network and utilizing these methods, you'll see a dramatic increase in the health, wellness, and yield of your plants. And we've got scientific results alongside actual real-life field studies to support this belief. The people here at Newater Farms are just one of many locations that have been testing this system. I'd like you to hear a bit from the people who manage their crops and develop their farming practices. They'll tell you what they've done in the past, how they've been supported and challenged by their old practices, and how the agri-harvest system is changing the lives of their plants and their produce.
Yeah, so I guess you figured out Allie's not from here. She's in Belize, so been a great addition to our team. She has a great quote that we like to share, and we believe that what we're doing is sacred work. It's very important, and that the seeds we plant to build community are just as sacred as the seeds we plant in the ground. So this is much more than agriculture. This is about life and community, and this is what this is about today. We've got Auburn University here. We have Redeeming the Dirt Ministry here. We have us, different parts of the world, different interests. So we come together to lean into this conversation of how do we make things better for ourselves and for our food. So we're about a network of people that have gathered together to build a regenerative community that's done through resilient agriculture. So backing up, you think of the word resilient, it means we're able to recover from outside forces and stresses, and typically we think of negative things. We can recover from that so it doesn't destroy us. But that's going to help because we are building relationships and building communities that will be also resilient. And you know, I was talking to somebody the other day about what we're seeing in the ag space now is that farmers have always been good about helping each other. But a lot of times it's a reaction to a crisis. That's something that's always been in their DNA and their nature. But what's returning back is to build those relationships and help one another before the crisis happens. So they're responding instead of just reacting. So we're seeing farmers are like, hey, we're not in competition with one another, because if one fails, we all fail. If one succeeds, we all succeed. And so it's really nice to see that happening across our landscape. But we're about building these kinds of things. Just a couple of great quotes to kind of get us started. David Montgomery and his wife Ann Bickley wrote a book years ago called What Your Food Ate. And there's the really great saying is, how we treat the land affects how it in turn treats us. And so there's a return to this idea of stewardship, not living off the land, but living with the land. Not, you know, I was thinking about this morning, you know, we may not want to admit it, but there's parts of us that are narcissistic. What can you do for me? So land, plants, what can you do for me? And so we're going to do whatever it takes to get what I need. And that's kind of what has led us to the crisis we find ourselves in with agriculture and our lack of soil health. Also, it goes back to, you know, we're coming up to 100 years of the Dust Bowl. And at the conclusion of that, Franklin Roosevelt wrote a letter to all the governors in the states. And he let off the letter that says, the letter to this governor said, a nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. We've got to do something. We are at a crisis point. We're at a tipping point for this nation. The largest mass exodus out of Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl. They all moved west to California because they couldn't sustain themselves with life. So what their ag practices had done, they destroyed their communities, and that was the downfall that we're seeing now with the destruction of soil. So we've got some. Here's the problem. We've done in the great name, and I'm part of this problem, I guess, with my education of automation and industrialization of agriculture. We have brought some practices that seemed good ideas at the time to maximize efficiency and production. And what we've done, we've overtilled and destroyed the land. We've gone to monocultures that's nothing like what nature does. We've introduced toxic chemicals, and we've overgrazed our pastures. So we've introduced these stresses in the system, and now we're reaping the benefit. Sorry, what kind of benefit is it of those systems? So just some of the systems associated with damaged soil, and Chandler's going to talk about that some today. What we see a decrease in is nutrient density in our food. You can go in a grocery store now, and they're coming out with things now where you can measure it on site, and you'll be astonished at what's not in the food anymore. We've got to eat more food to get the same calorie benefits. Water retention, drought stresses, it's really wreaking havoc on our system. The lack of earthworms, the vultures of the soil. You go digging around the soil. I remember growing up, and there'd just be earthworms everywhere. Now we don't see that. And then just their drought resistance is a decrease. It's such a stress on our plants now. And even in a wonderful state like Alabama with 65 inches of annual rainfall, we have these 2 and 3 week stresses without rainfall, and all of a sudden our fields are dead. So that's a big issue. But there's some increases, things like fruit and root rot, less stable shelf life of our fruits and vegetables, increased pest problems, wilting plants, leaf discoloration, which all affect photosynthesis. So an increase in I would say the increase of the detriment of the plant of problems with it that we have to produce much more food to get that same amount. I found, one interesting statistic is Egypt is the largest producer of grain, and they lose about 40 to 50% of their grain every year from rotting grain. It can't sustain itself. So they have to think they got to produce twice as much to get the same amount because they've got an annual loss that's just unheard of. So things like that are happening. There's been some great documentaries over the last 6-8 years. One is Kiss the Ground. The part of that is that the soil is the beginning of the quality of food. Soil is the beginning of the quality of food. And those of us that have our hands in the dirt every day, we love this quote because it just legitimizes what we're doing. And when we begin to focus on soil health, it's going to lead you to what you're eating, what you're putting on your table and in your bellies, because it all begins in the soil. I might get Noah to say a word about that too, because he was one of the ones that helped me rethink how I was doing things over the years. This is kind of a lot what Chandler's going to talk to us about. So just some best practices for healthy soil. I want to first say it begins with the change of your mindset. Also, context is very, very important. But it's building that soil health. It's building the foundation of our food systems. Things like cover crops and composting, natural ways to amend the soil to make it more healthy. Minimizing that soil disturbance, that you're not constantly tilling the soil and destroying that soil structure. So you'll hear words like no tillage. The introduction of synthetic inputs. We always say these words ending in IDE or things, think genocide and homicide. We've got pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, these synthetic fertilizers that don't build soil health. In fact, they decrease the longevity of that soil health. We can see dead zones in places like the Mississippi Delta where they don't plant anything anymore because they've just destroyed that soil. And these things stick around. That's not like they're one and done. Keeping a living root in the ground year round to benefit the soil through photosynthesis and capturing that carbon, nitrogen out of the air and going into the soil. Also minimizing erosion if you're keeping that soil covered. And then also crop rotation and plant diversification are very, very important. Plants have different needs, and doing the same thing year over year after year depletes the soil of specific nutrients. But when you move those things around, you're going to build that resilience in the soil that you're looking for. I'm going to skip this one somehow. So just a little bit about what we're doing here at New Water Farms. I've got some product back there. We began using magnesium hydroxide nanoplate, nanotechnology form. This is the most purest form of magnesium. Magnesium is at the center of the chlorophyll atom. It's very, very important in the photosynthesis cycle of those plants. Every living thing needs magnesium, and actually every living thing is pretty deficient in magnesium, plants, animals, and humans. This is our preferred product. We began testing it out of a crisis when we had yellow rust in our blackberries, and this fungus just devastated our harvest. So we began to build plant health through the introduction of a foliar spray of this magnesium hydroxide. It augments the soil. It's a nutrient supplement. It doesn't replace the fertilizer, but it helps to balance out the pH of the soil and the plants. It accelerates growth. It greatly increases the fruit yield. We've got some through the network and test like 350 bell peppers on one plant in one season, which usually you get like 15. And longer production. We've been using our tomatoes here this summer, and we're still making tomatoes. And usually we're done by July the 4th. So it's a great product. It doesn't dissipate. That's a huge issue for us here on the lake. It's not gonna be leached out into the lake, much like phosphorus does. There's another product I've been using, and the great thing about these, I was talking to Chandler, I can tank mix all these together in foliar spray. I can make one pass and apply it what the plant needs. So this is a product that we also use for magnesium, but it has lots of other micronutrients, sulfur, boron, cobalt, molybdenum, and it helps with the mobility and the nutrient transfer within the plants. It's a great product that we can, again, add other things like calcium and some other fertilizers. Allie mentioned the deer repellent. This is our biggest pest here at New Water Farms. Deer, sometimes rabbits show up every now and then. I remember years ago, I was at Noah's farm, and I was like, man, you're building an unbelievable barricade around your garden. It's like a fort out here. I think was it 8 foot tall? 8 foot tall deer fence. He said, they can sail over that thing if they want to. You're just making it harder for them. That's the thing, is to make it hard for them. But this stuff works. It smells unbelievably horrible. My wife, Wendy, knows when I spray it. She says, you can't come in the house. They stink. I said, that's the smell of production. I'm coming in the house. But it's an organic product. It's made from eggshells and garlic, and it really lingers. We've judiciously sprayed it over a year, and we feel like we've sort of trained the deer not to come around. Because we're having to spray less and less, where we used to get a lot of deer pressure. They just have learned to stay away. It's plant safe, eco-friendly. It's not going to, I wouldn't drink this if I were you, but it's not going to hurt you if you spray it on your fruits. But it does last long. It's a commercially available product. This is a new one we haven't really mentioned before. This brand is out of Texas. I have a friend that produces this in Texas, and he's been kind to donate some of this, and we've been using it here at New Water for about 5 years. This is composted broiler chicken litter. It's a 333 NPK, but it has about 2,700 different strains of beneficial microbes, fungi, and bacteria. I like these products because they're idiot-proof. We actually had our interns back in the summer put this out, and they piled it around the base of the plants. If you did that with a nitrogen fertilizer, it'd be dead the next day. This stuff's still alive. But it really is a living microbe in the soil, and it's a slow release because it's pelletized, and it's totally organic. This is OMRI certified, and it's about 3 to 4 month distribution of nutrition in the soil. The good news is there's a company that's just started that's working on having this available in Alabama, and that company is going to be turning 2 million tons of broiler litter into fertilizer for farmers in Alabama. So just we'll keep you posted on that development. Hopefully within a year, that'll be commercially available to the farmers. Another product that we use here, NutriPlant AG643, is a foliar spray. Again, it's low content of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium or potash. Got lots of other trace elements that the plant needs. And it's a foliar applied product as well, and it really does help. We have used this for about a year now, I think, Buck, is what we've been using it here. And it's idiot-proof. You can't really apply this, but we use this as our base here at New Water, and we spray we have about 7 different crops we use this on, and we spray different formulas based on what the plant needs at the time of the year. So whether it's bud initiation or flowering or fruit set or fruit finish, we can compose a recipe for what that plant needs at the time with all of these different products. So we've gone totally to biologics, no synthetics anymore in all of our growing zones here on the property. The great news is we reduced our glyphosate, we think, by 90% this year. normally been sprayed here on the property. So super excited to pass that news on. Anyway, I'm going to get Jeff. You want to come up and make this presentation about a little more about NutriPlant AG? This is Jeff Deaton, all the way from big city of Atlanta. Yeah. So you can just you hit this button,
Click
it goes to the next thing.
Okay,
And
all right.
It's got the video on here too.
Okay, great. So this is presented by Jennifer Deaton. I'm not Jennifer Deaton. I'm Jeff Deaton. There's a Jennifer Deaton here who isn't this Jennifer Deaton, actually. So my sister is also Jennifer Deaton, but this is my wife who usually presents this. So I'm kind of following through here on her notes. I might be stumbling through it a little bit, but I do know a little bit about what we're talking about here. So I guess I'll start with the video. She usually starts with this video, huh? Thanks, Robert. So you guys saw the name Amway. The last product that Dr. Brandon showed up here, the NutriPlant 643, is a product that's been handled and distributed by Amway Corporation. Amway, if you haven't heard of it, is a company that's been around since 1959. It established itself as a way for somebody that doesn't have a lot of means or whatever could start a business with really the sky being the limit. So it's been a business that I guess if we sort of diffuse it down to what it really is today, it's a way that a lot of people get paid for word of mouth advertising. They can talk about products and pass that information on, and then it's monetized and they make money from it. It's all tracked. It's networking. It's a community. And you can see, so not just some of the things that Dr. Brandon was talking about from community, but also regenerative farming, Nutrilite, the vitamins. They said a word here, traceability. Like, this is a huge operation. Amway's been around for many, many years. It's like $7-8 billion in annual sales. They produce a vitamin line, vitamins and food supplements called Nutrilite. Nutrilite is grown on all those farms they just showed. So, yeah. Oh, am I not on camera? Sorry. Thank you. So it is. It's that word traceability. I'm getting back to that. they actually produce these so this is the level of quality control, and this is just to give you an idea of the product that's coming from this, and again is connected to what's going on with the magnesium here at Newater Farms and the NutriPlant 643. But with that, vitamins, when they are growing those in the soil at their farm, they're producing these in in a certified organic farming situation where it's controlled. All the no pesticides, herbicides, all the things that Dr. Brandon just talked about that we think are important are going into those vitamins. Most people probably buy vitamins or use vitamins. How many people here use some type of vitamin? So that's less than I would expect, but it's the majority. So what we put in our body matters. And if you're putting a bunch of pills in your body that you're not, like, vitamins are not regulated. So if you're doing something like that, it's very important that you're getting the right thing. And back to this word, I still have not finished, the traceability. Amway can take, and Nutrilite can take the product, the tablet that you've got, and it is literally traceable back to the plant. This is how well controlled that system is. They know right back where this farm came from, when it was harvested, etc. That is the detail to which they're doing this. And of course, the product is incredible. It's very good. You even have a magnesium supplement. Every living thing needs magnesium, as we were saying. So, but the regenerative farming approach is something that Nutrilite and Amway take very seriously. Again, something that's totally akin to Newater Farms. And then there's a number of people, since this is a big part of what we're doing, and since Amway tracks this and monetizes it, it's a way that sort of the community has been able to profit from what's going on here, is that we connect the network through this. And again, they track sort of word of mouth advertising. So if you tell somebody else about this, you can connect to the business and get income created for that. We're promoting what's going on here at Newater Farms. We're promoting better agriculture, better health, and regenerative soil and regenerative farming techniques. And then there's also a little profit. So there's a little bit of a side benefit for us on that. The cost for getting started with the Amway business, if you're interested in that aspect of that, is none. So I would suggest talking to Bill or Buck along those lines if that's something that you're interested in. But we'll go a little bit more in detail here and see what my wife has in this PowerPoint. So this is listing here the NutriPlant AG. And I just mentioned this thing about the business. I mean, it's a business you own, and you're your own business owner. We've actually have training connected to helping this business work. That's not my part. Okay, I won't do it then. I'm glad you told me that, because I was like, this is familiar. So, but back just a little further on the network and the business and the community, because a big part, I think, of the strategy of building an Amway business has always been build the person, and the person will build the business. And so there's a lot of focus, and you might, if you're familiar, you might have heard this or seen something in the past, that Amway is very engaged in sort of like personal growth and training and things like that. And what's amazing about it is that training and that sort of investing yourself, building sales technique, building leadership skills, building things like that, that availability, that network, those tools are available for free for a year for anyone that joins the network. And we have like a national thing coming up in Atlanta at the very beginning of September, Labor Day weekend, which would be free if you're joining the business to go and attend. And there'll be a number of us going to that. So anyway, it's a great way to get good things in your body, to connect to what's going on here at Newater Farms, and to profit a little bit from that. So, Buck, is there anything you would add? Or all right, great. How's that?
Great, man. All right, he's in. Yeah, so just kind of think back to the earlier slide about some of the things that we saw decreasing, some of the things that we saw increasing. What we found here at Newater through the network, other people testing these different products and changing the way that they farm, this is what we're seeing. We see healthier plants, bigger root mass, stronger stalks, increased nutrient uptake, more resistance to pathogen, pests, and diseases. When you get the biology right, the chemistry follows. And what we found is we need less chemistry because we're focusing on the biology. In our vegetable garden out here, I sprayed neem oil one time this year, nothing else. And we've seen a greater diversity of species. There's a great fact, a hip pocket thing for you to have is for one bad bug, there's 1,700 good bugs. So that's documented. And these guys might say, well, you're close, but okay, let's say it's 1,000, whatever. 1 to 1,000 is a pretty good ratio, right? But a lot of times what we have in there is we see bugs and we think, oh my gosh, I got bugs, I got to go kill them. And so you may be targeting one particular bug, but a lot of times you're going to wipe out all the bugs. And so you don't have that predator-prey relationship, that healthy, biodiverse environment in your growing space. But when we get the biology right and those plants are healthy and those aren't, the bugs aren't targeting diseased plants or sugars and whatever, when you get that right, there's less attraction for those stresses. And that's what we have found here at Newater especially. But our fruit's healthier, larger fruit. It's got more flavor. It actually has flavor. We've got greater budding. I was talking to Chandler a little bit about our blueberries. We changed our program from a synthetic base to a biologic base, timing it right with the plant. We had a record blueberry harvest this year. We were, I want to say, a 35% increase in what we did last year. And it was great to see those bushes loaded. I mean, it was incredible. Other part is increased harvest. So what we've seen with this particular magnesium is an increase in more fruits. Scotty, he's not here today, had a Roma tomato plant. I think it was a Roma tomato plant. 7 bushels of tomatoes off of one plant, which is a lot of tomatoes. We had a guy that sprayed this system on his muscadines. You must have to really like muscadines to want to do that. But he had 4 separate fruit sets on the muscadine plants. Usually you get 1. He had 4 separate. So his harvest went past the frost, which is incredible. And obviously there's a loss of fruit due to diseases. Is what we're seeing. So really, this is Jeff mentioned it. I've mentioned it. I hope you guys understand that a farm is nothing without the community that supports it. And that's not just buying stuff from it. I think it's all in. We're all here to help each other. And so it's very important. Hopefully one day we'll have the Auburn Community Garden in this slide because that's a pretty incredible project they got going on now. So yeah, just we're a regenerative ag community trying our best to make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations. I'm going to transition a little bit from this presentation. This is pretty much where we are now. But if you're interested in testing any of these products, you can see me or Leo can help you with that. Buck can help. There's other people in the room that can help with that. Deborah can help with that. She's got a system she started this summer and has had an amazing result. We should get her to come up and speak. And everybody, she's not lacking in enthusiasm and excitement about what happened to her raised bed garden system. So, but yeah, this stuff. When you change your mindset and change your practices, I think with these things. Not to say there aren't going to be challenges and Chandler's probably going to share some of this, but I want to recognize a really good friend at this point as we transition. I'm going to ask Noah to come forward. So Noah Sanders, up the road, 45 minutes, got 2 of his boys here with him today. And I met him at the Pepper Place Farmers Market, became fast friends. He wrote a book called Redeeming the Dirt.
Born Again Dirt.
I'm sorry, Born Again Dirt. Born Again Dirt, sorry, that's yes. And he taught me a lot about farming and agriculture. And it was just a lot of simple things like take your long rows and turn them sideways and double your row. And it's a lot more psychologically appealing. If I said, go weed that row, if it's 40 feet long versus 200 feet long, which one am I going to want to weed? But really helped me focus on soil health and changed a lot of our practice, composting, mulching. Just been a great friend over the last probably 12 years at least, maybe longer than that. But I wanted him to just talk a little bit about what he does. He's got a ministry through agriculture and then whatever else he wanted to share. But I want you guys to meet him. He's just a great guy and just always a joy to be with. I will say, I know one thing he's changed over the last probably 4 or 5 years. I wanted to just spend a half a day with him at his farm. And he ran from chore to chore. I was like, this is unbelievable. And the last time I went, he said, I don't do that anymore. That just took too much energy out, but very focused and very successful and just loves Jesus and God and wants to see more people involved in agriculture. So you'll step over here. They can see you across the world.
Thanks. Well, very grateful to be here. I just got the invitation a couple of days ago that Robert invited me. So excited to see so many people here and excited about farming and especially these regenerative practices. I grew up in Auburn and was interested in agriculture at an early age, did not grow up farming. Sadly, most of the people that I knew in agriculture around Auburn told me, don't go into farming. Most of them is because they had not had success, which is, an element of that. And so, of course, I went in saying, I'm going to figure out how that works. So anyways, we ran a small-scale farming business where we sold vegetables, meat, chickens, eggs, all that in Pepper Place, and then did a custom CSA for several years. But through that, I really became passionate about teaching people what we had been learning. And so the business side I'm really passionate about. But then we got to connected with some people that have mentored me from Africa, from Zimbabwe, that have really worked with food security and how to teach people at the very basic level to use what they have around them, to look at the way God's created stuff in nature, to start with the heart, and to be able to come out of poverty without outside resources, just training and mentorship. And so I've tried to bring some of that here to the U.S. to help us address similar problems, and we ended up feeling like God told us to shut down our farming business in 2022. It was kind of what we'd always dreamed it would be, but we really wanted to invest in that deeper level of food security, people in their own backyards. So we went from kind of commercial production to now we just do homesteading and a lot of training and investing in people that are training other people. So we've done that with people, 5-day trainings at our farm, people that are from around the world and around the country. And more recently, I'm excited. It's one of those interesting things how God works. I was working on these duplicating kind of church gardens called a well water garden that we had been developing for kind of the faith community to be able to teach farming and discipleship at the same time. And then I, through different people I know, got connected with a project locally in Sylacauga. And one of the people working there used to be a customer of mine at Lake Martin here at Russell Crossroads. And she was involved in that. And anyways, I kind of bit by bit got involved with an after-school program that's doing a pilot project for teaching high schoolers regenerative agriculture. And was able to bring in the things that we had learned. And today we've seen some really, really exciting things where you can see these young people that some of them, their parents made them come to now they don't want to leave. And some of them are actually helping be the staff to run that program. So that's something that I'm really passionate about right now is how can we get that pipeline of passionate young people. There's plenty of resources and training, but if nobody's interested, if no young kid gets bit by the bug, and then if they don't have positive, profitable solutions and mentors, that's kind of the network I'm interested in really developing right now and seeing, because we need that for the future. And I'm excited to have my boys. That's what we're working on with our family, and excited what God's going to do, and thankful for this network and you guys coming. But love to connect with any of you guys in any ways we can work together. Encourage you. Love to do that. So thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Noah. While I'm making this, hopefully this works. All right. Allie, can you see slides still?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We invited Chandler Gruener this morning to be our keynote speaker for this meeting. Chandler's a native of Missouri. I think he's kind of made a loop around. But did a bachelor's degree in plant science crop management at the University of Missouri, and then did a master's degree at the University of Arkansas in soil and environmental science, and then a Ph.D. at the University of Georgia, working in crop and soil sciences. He is, I guess you have a joint appointment and an extension as an assistant professor in the soil science department at Auburn University. My friend and I traveled to the field day up in Madison County, and he was the first speaker in a field trial plot that he's working on. He may share some of that today. But works a lot in the regenerative ag space, soil fertility, soil health, plant health. And he's very wide, broadly applications. But works a lot with farmers on the ground, all size farms, but also in the classroom and the lab. So what I love about him, he's got that lab piece, but he's got the practical, how do we make this work in the real world? So I've asked him to come and talk about our context. So he's going to talk about Alabama. And with that, Chandler, you can just advance your slides right there, and we'll let him talk. So thank you, Chandler, for being here.
Yes, thank you for that introduction. So yeah, he kind of went over my educational background. So after I graduated from University of Georgia with my Ph.D., I went up and worked in North Dakota for 2 summers. I was an extension soil health specialist, so I only worked in extension. Didn't have as much of a lab component, and then the opportunity came open to come back down to the South. And so I was kind of excited because I went to Georgia for 4 years, really liked being in Georgia, a similar environment over here, had a great opportunity, met with some people down here in Auburn, really liked it. So I took that opportunity to come back down here, and now I have that joint appointment like you mentioned. So I work with Alabama Extension and then Auburn University, and so I do professor work. So I have the plot trials and stuff like that, but then we also do the extension. We have on-farm trials. I visited a farm 2 days ago. I guess I didn't visit anyone yesterday. We were just working in the lab, but visited farm yesterday, and we'll be visiting farms again tomorrow. So I travel around the state. I also work not only in row crops, but also vegetable production and in pasture, grazing, rangeland management. So if you have beef cattle or whatever like that, Bahia grass systems or whatever, and need some soil information on that, I also work in them systems as well. So kind of like a little bit of an outline. So what we're going to talk about soil health practices across Alabama. So I'll talk about a publication we have available on the extension website called Principles to Practices. Go through the indicators, how practices are evolving, some fertility basics, fertility and cover crops, and then just cover cropping in general. And so feel free at any time during the thing, just raise your hand. I'll take questions whenever. There's no formality to this. You can just ask me questions, shoot it whenever. Perfectly happy. And so this is, so many of you may have seen I guess I need to stay here in the camera. So here's the logo here for what we've been using. So many of you may recognize these same 4 principles that use part of the USDA and RCS. And so maximizing soil cover, minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing biodiversity, and maximizing continuous living root. So I use this logo. And so what I did with this is I like them same principles. I liked a lot of that information. A lot of people use very similar ones. Some people add one or take away one. Pretty much all the information kind of is there, but sometimes we put them into another category. So just how we categorize is a little bit different, but pretty much everyone has the exact same ones. But here I just wanted to add a little bit of context. I know sometimes people see animal as the 5th component. So my animal, I put that in maximizing biodiversity because to me, that's maximizing biodiversity. When you put plants and animals on the land, that's more than just having plants. So you increase your biodiversity. And so what this publication kind of goes through is kind of some of the basics, like you can see my little cow photo from North Dakota. And so we're advising on a system there. It's a little weedy system. We were trying to get it back into a pretty productive system and mixing native species in there, going from a former just hay operation into a mixing of native species is what I was out there advising on that photo. But understand that not all places use the same goal. So like I mentioned, I worked in Georgia, Arkansas, Missouri, North Dakota, and now here in Alabama. And so not everything works. And so there's a little bit of a context in there. A lot of times we talk about like maybe a 5th principle should be context to your situation. So how did that work? How can it be there for you? And so also the other key note is just because we have these 4 here, maybe on your area or your specific spot, you can't do all 4. Maybe animals isn't really realistic for your exact spot or that situation. Maybe you can't get a cover crop in there because your crop is a perennial crop and you're covering that land using that way. So you don't have a cover crop in there. Maybe you're using perennial cover crops and not annuals, or maybe you're using annuals. Maybe you need to do a little bit of strip tillage here and there, or something every once in a while to break up. Maybe you have weed pressure that's real bad and you need to incorporate a little bit of tillage to help get rid of some weeds. So we understand that sometimes there's that context in there why you're doing something. So it's not just the actions, but it's why you're doing it is also included in there. So this publication just kind of, it just introduces the topic, kind of talks about some basic information, kind of goes through some commonalities, and then letting people know that it's a journey. It's not just something you do on day one. It's just going to build slowly over time. You can't just put it all together in one system. It'd be great if we could just jump out there and do it all from day one. But to me, you need to take little steps. What I always work with my students when I'm working with anybody is it's, you got to build up. And so you can't just start day one going out in the field and doing everything and it's going to work perfectly. You got to figure out what worked, because what maybe works for someone, maybe doesn't work for you. You'd be like, oh, I kind of get that to work, but I made this little tweak and now it works on my farm or my area of production. So sometimes you may have to make them little tweaks, but you take what was baseline from somewhere else. So a lot of times we talk about these practices. And so when people start incorporating them practices, they're like, how do I know these practices are truly working out there? What is going on? Like, am I actually doing anything, or am I just doing this just to do it? Like, why? How do I measure that? How do I know what's going on? Because that's what a lot of people come to me, being a soil health specialist, is how do we know we're actually changing something out there? So we use these indicators. So these indicators they help measure back to the principles. So commonly, we separate into 3 categories how I like to do it. I know I put in a triangle diagram you can see here. So you got your chemical, physical, and biological. Some things kind of interrelate to them. It's not really perfectly triangles. I used AI to help me make this logo. And so I intentionally had to put one of them on top, chemical. Not the chemical needs to be on top. It's the fact that it's a triangle. So I was wanting to do a triangle logo because they all rely on each other. They're all 3 points. You need each other. And so chemical, this is your nutrient cycling, which is connected back to your biological process, which if you have both of them functioning, you change your physical properties of your soil. So people always ask me, what's going to respond first? What can I measure that's going to change first? And so a lot of times we use nutrients in your soil, your phosphorus, potassium, that's something you can measure. And then you can see from year to year, if you're building your soil up, you'll start seeing nutrients kind of slowly build up, even though your inputs aren't changing. So if your inputs are flatlined, if you have inputs or whatever they're at, but you'll start seeing them build up because you're regenerating everything. It's moving up slowly. So you'll see the chemicals. So that's why I put it at the top, because that's kind of one of your ones that's going to move pretty quick. The ones can move a little bit quicker, but also can highly fluctuate depending on the time of year is biologicals. That's one I always warn people on. It's like biologicals can be a little bit tricky to measure when you're not super familiar with them. So as the soil gets cool in the wintertime, the biological properties slow down. Your mass of biologicals kind of can decrease a little bit, but as the soil gets warmer, they start getting happy, they start moving around, they start multiplying, things get a little bit more. Also, when you have plants present, so if you don't have a lot of plant species present or actively growing, they don't have as much food sources, they don't have as much things going on, so sometimes your population can drag a little bit in the wintertime because their food sources aren't as readily available as the summertime when your plants are growing. So biologicals can be a little bit tricky, so if you're measuring them, try to be consistent. If you're always going to measure them in May, measure them in May. If you compare something from measured in May versus something in October, it's going to be a little bit hard to understand what's truly going on there because there's different temperatures in the soil, different plant residues are on the surface, different plant residues are in the soil breaking down. So sometimes kind of fluctuate a little bit. And unfortunately, the longest one, but one of my favorite ones to work with, what I did most of my PhD work with, was physical measurements. So measuring that bulk density, how compact that soil is. Measuring soil penetration resistance, that's tied back to bulk density. How well can you shove a rod into the soil? How well does water flow into the soil, and how well does water flow throughout the soil? So them are some of the things that, they take more time to alter. A lot of times we talk about in row crop agriculture, and a lot of this land here in Alabama was row crop agriculture at one point in history. So soil has that kind of memory, and so we're still working on returning that memory. Here in Alabama, we have a lot of altisols, which just means old soils, kind of way to think about it. So when I teach soils, every once in a while I help out with that, and I like to do the land judging and stuff like that. That's a 4-H and FFA program where you learn about soils and the environment, land uses and stuff like that. So I teach about soils, and so I always relate things to age of soil. So I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Missouri. We have a lot of alpha soils and mollisols. They're like your middle-aged soils. They're going to have a lot more organic content, but as they get older, a lot of that's been eroded away. That's just a time, natural process. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of years and hundreds of years. So now we have altisols. That's what most of northern Alabama and central Alabama, that's what that soil map was showing. I'll bring it up again eventually. And so we have them older soils, and so they're going to be wore down a little bit. So we need to work together on building things up. And so I like to use these indicators to measure practices or measure the practices that we're doing to see what will respond. And so at the end, there's not really a top level, just chemical can be a little bit consistent, easier to see building. Biological fluctuates really well. It's a great one if you're consistent with your measurements and your style of measurements. That one's going to be the fastest one to actually truly respond. And then your slowest one's physical, just because that one's going to take the most amount of time, because structure of soil took many years to form a lot of times. It doesn't take that long to break it down, but it takes a long time to get it to form back again. So that's why I went on the tangent talking about soil and soil formation there. So practices are evolving. Equipment is changing. Like you mentioned earlier, we went from mold-bore plows at one point in history, and then we went to a little bit lighter tillage and a little bit lighter tillage. So slowly over time, our tillage has become shallower and shallower till a lot of no-till is becoming back into it, or small strip tillage areas here and there. So we've noticed with, I went to school with a soil pedologist, was my advisor, so he studies soils and soil formation. So every time we go out there, we dig a little pit or we do a little core, and then we look at the soil and learn what that soil meant to us or what it was teaching us. And so a lot of times you can see, if you find them old plow pans, mold-bore plow plowed down to 12 inches, you're going to find that plow pan about 13 to 14 inches. As we moved in more like a double disking, lighter equipment that didn't go as deep, we started going down to about 6 inches. So you see that plow pan about 7 or 8 inches. Now that a lot of people have switched away and started going to more no-till, we don't see that plow pan, but we still have it down below. We're still needing to break it up. We're still needing to do some methods to get through it, kind of change things. So exploring some new and newly modified tillage devices. There's some strip tillage devices that help kind of break through some of the plow pans without disturbing the whole field while we're using them cover crops to regenerate. Because like I said, we can't always jump immediately into the next thing. And so if we have them hard pans, the roots can't get through it. You'll see them roots hit it and they'll turn sideways. We'll call it J or L rooting. So you do need some way to get through that. So sometimes a modified tillage device and then using cover crops in the wintertime to take advantage of that cracked, broken up area. And so sometimes we do a subsoiler, then we use cover crops for several years. We help that, work together and build it up. Planting techniques with high residue crops and timings. And so practices are evolving. So right here, so we went from a field, this is when I was in North Dakota, that picture, and behind that cloud of dust, there's a quad track with a harrow on there. And so the cloud of dust makes everyone very nervous when we first seen it. We had a rain. So where I was in North Dakota, we got about 14 inches of rain a year. We knew we were going to have a rain the next day. We just cut our weed off of there. So we went out there and drug a harrow, maybe a little too quick because we were trying to get it done. But the purpose of it was we drug that harrow over that field. That slope is about 3 to 4% slope of that field. So we drug that harrow over it real quick. We got that rain, that wheat grew, greened up. We had a free cover crop. We didn't have to buy the seed because we knew we had a little bit coming out the back of the combine. It greened up. We were out some diesel fuel and a little wear and tear on our harrow, but not that bad. Dust cloud looks very scary, but it wasn't that bad. We prevented a lot of erosion from filling that ditch up that winter time. So, maybe a little dust got in the air. It only stayed pretty much centered around that because we still have pretty good ground cover and residue. The only reason why we were disturbing that soil just a little bit was to scratch in them seeds. So that way when that rain came, we get the green cover on the field. We didn't have to worry much about that erosion down the thing. So throughout the entire winter, I hiked out there every so often, even in the snow, and would look at the ditches and kind of keep measuring and then dig down the snow a little bit to kind of inspect how the soil was doing. Kind of a little, I guess, pet project, as you call it, or whatever. We just had a field. I didn't have a treatment with and without it. We just did it on the entire field just to see what would happen. So that was kind of a nice thing to see. So sometimes tillage has a purpose, and that I call that some light tillage, a little harrowing, light scratching. So we had tillage with a purpose. So that's one of the things we always like to illustrate is have a reasoning behind it in your tillage for a purpose, not just doing it just to do it. And so like I showed you the 3 indicators earlier, so I'm just going to kind of work through them and talk a little bit about each one of them. And so biological, we'll start with that one. So this one's kind of a key one. So it's made up of your microbial biomass, your microbial activity, some of the things that I've mentioned earlier that kind of fluctuate depending on the time, how warm it is, how much soil moisture, how much residue. And that's what helps mineralize your carbon and nitrogen. It's made up of your macroorganisms. And there's a little, textbook definition, diverse community of microorganisms in the soil are made up of all these components right here. So organic matter is kind of the one I like to talk about because it kind of fits a little bit into each category depending on what part of the fraction of the organic matter we're talking about. Organic matter is kind of complex. I always like to say if you put all the soil scientists in a room and had us define organic matter, what category we put it in, we wouldn't be consistent. How we organize and how we fractionate it is kind of a little bit how we think about it and how we think about it functions. We have all the same information, all the same components, but some of us think of it being more biologically because it does have a living component. Some of us think about it chemical because it's made up of carbon. I say chemical as in the sense of a nutrient chemical. I'm talking about chemical. So you have carbon in there. So you have, and then it has other nutrients in the organic matter. So you have the chemical component. And then it's, it's made in a different shape. So it's changing the structure of the soil. It's, allowing for more water to move in. It's holding on to water. So it's impacting the physical. So when people always ask me, if I'm going to measure something over time to see my soils changing, which one thing? I only have a very limited budget. What was the one thing I would do? I lean towards soil organic matter if we're going to do one thing. I like to measure all the things because I like to see all the different things change and how they change over time. But organic matter, a lot of things tie back to it. And so the reason why they tie back to it is because it's integrated, like I talked about, the physical, chemical, and biological. So I'm just going to go a little bit more into what organic matter is, just so you guys can understand a little bit more in depth. So on this top part of here, we have this pie chart. And so this pie chart, so an ideal soil, this is from a textbook. And so it's not looking at an Altasol, it's not looking at your sandy soils we have here in Alabama too. This is just a general textbook. We're not really thinking about soil texture here. So the mineral, the texture part, that's the 45%. Your organic matter is 5%. Your air and water's 25 and 25 each. So that 25 and 25 each, that left-hand side is 50%. A lot of times I hold the water glass up, but I've drank more in my water today than normal at this part. So normally you think about it, you have half full. So the bottom half, so we got 25% air, we have 25% water, and this top half up here would be full of your mineral and organic content. So that's your solid particles. And so you want to keep that in balance. So now I understand Alabama soils, a lot of times we're below 1%. We're working on getting a little bit higher. Some people have 2 or 3%. That's great. Sometimes we're getting 5, 6, 7%. And so, we're just trying to balance the soil. And so what happens in that soil diagram is when you start reducing the organic matter and you start taking it out of the air and water section too, and you start compressing it together. So what I mean by compression is if we took this glass, let's say we just cut the top layer off, we took it all down, we just smashed it down. So now we reduce the air and the water. That reduced the air and water flow through the glass. But it looks like it increases the mineral matter. The mineral matter did not increase. What we did was we smashed it together. If we remove that organic component, you reduced, that fraction where things can move around the biological area and everything like that, and you're just increasing your mineral matter. So a lot of times people, when they see bulk density measurements, want it to reduce, which by reducing means you not expanded, but you decreased the compaction in it. But you allowed for more movement into the soil. You allowed for that penetration resistance to go down and everything. So now I'm going to work my way through the organic contents. So organic matter, so in that 5%, we make it into like 3 areas. So we have fresh, active, and stable. So fresh is about 15%. Think about that. That is your living items. That's your bacteria, fungi, algae, viruses, protozoa, and then your macro, your insects and your earthworms. So one of the demos I carry around in my trailer called Soil Science Explorer is this earthworm box. And so we have different dark soil, and then we put some sand layers in there. We dropped a few earthworms. This is a few days into the experiment. So we have plexiglass. We cover the plexiglass with cardboard. And then if we take it out to events, take the cardboard off the side, we can see the earthworms mixing the soil. Earthworms are very important. They need to be out there. They're mixing the soil. Same with the insects. Bacteria, fungi are doing similar items. They're working on breaking down items, making nutrients available, but they're a little harder to see for demonstration at a booth. So we don't show them, but we highlight the earthworms here in this demonstration. But they're all part of that living matter, which makes about 15%. And they're, changing the aggregation of the soil so water can move in. It increases their water infiltration and water movement through the soil. Your active is about 45% of it. So this is the percentage. So if you think about it, 100% of that 5%, we're breaking it down to subcategories. So this is your recently dead items of your fresh. This is your plant residues, your roots, your manure. So this is after the roots die at the end of the season. They're needing to get broke down by that living fraction. So this is going to be the cells from the recently dead, the sugars, globulin, protein, starches, amino acids. These are the food for the microbes. Some of you may have heard of the Haney soil test. Basically, that's measuring the food for the microbes, and that's kind of focusing really in on this section right here. And so then the last fraction, which is the one that changes the soil color, which is also the hardest to build. It's the most important, but it's the location for your CEC building. This is your stable fraction. Now, if you're following my math, that's 40%. But in soils, it can range from 33 to 50% approximately. And so you get some of actually I did these on a computer drawing and I tried to do some hand drawing on the bottom right-hand side. So organic matter, like I mentioned, it's got this little bit different structure. And so when it stacks together, it doesn't press together and make layers. So when you have clay, a lot of times, especially like black belt soils, when it dries down, it locks the nutrients in. A lot of clays too can get the nutrients stuck on there, and sometimes when they don't have enough water or soil moisture out there, they can lock nutrients and make it unavailable, and they can get locked in there. When they hydrate, they expand back out, and so they can be a little bit variable based on soil moisture. And also they'll have these plates and layers. Now we're talking, this is like a microscope view, so you're seeing a zoomed in like microscope view where you have the organic fraction that has these little bit different shape. The nutrients are held on there, so that helps build a little bit more CEC because they have a little bit different structure that can hold nutrients, and they're a little bit easier for plant availability. It's kind of the way to think about that on there. And this is also the hardest to break down due to its chemical structure and the way it's made. This fraction, the stable fraction, is pretty consistent, where the active can fluctuate a little bit and the fresh is obviously fluctuating very fast because microbes are producing and dying off all the time out in the soil. So they're just going to slowly fluctuate. So organic matter combine nutrients and water molecules, and so I brought that thing back up at the end here just to show that kind of that breakdown again. And then here's an actual real world example. I have 2 little soil cups right here. So that farm at the beginning where I was shown with the livestock, and so they've been doing one practice on a field. He'd been keeping it business as usual, and then one field he'd been trying his, I guess regenerative system is what he was calling it. And so this was in North Dakota. He'd been changing his species, having more native species, rotational grazing, keeping the livestock moving consistently across of it. So that way it didn't overfeed on the plants and kept a little bit of living plants going. So this is on a sandy soil, similar to what we have here in Alabama. So the top you can see very few aggregates compared to the bottom. So just a random sample from both of them. We see more aggregates. You can see the color change on the bottom part of that sample. That's from the organic content. So this is after about 10, 15 years of doing this practice. And so he was just looking for more innovative ways to expand this and use it on other parts of his field. He had some challenges that was limiting him on doing some other ones based on plant species and rotational grazing. So we worked on some ideas for him to start going down the path of expanding across his fields. But this is a real life example. I actually have these little cups of soil. They're a lot of times on my desk. I just moved into a new building, so they weren't on my desk the day you guys visited me, Robert. But a lot of times I have that on my desk, some little cups of soil. So here's just a little snapshot of organic matter. So organic matter is important, but just to understand it does take time. So these are both in two different field situations in Georgia. One's a pecan orchard from 21 to 23 I measured, and then one of them's a row crop, which is corn and cotton rotation from 2019 to 2021. And so, on the right-hand side, we'll start with the row crop. We averaged about 0.6 organic matter, and then we made it to average about a little over 0.9% organic matter over 3 years. And this is using row crop system. So both lines are row crop, or not row crop, are cover crops. So the green in the thing is this kind of clover the year it started. So I have a cover crop system. It's just the year it started. They're just 1 year difference in the cover crop between both of the locations, the orange versus green lines. So this is just to show you, to highlight, it's not super important to crops or anything, but highlight two different situations, two different fields. These were both on sandy soils. They had low organic matter. The pecan orchard had a little bit higher organic content, but we were still trying to build it and work it way up. And it takes a little bit of time. So this is just to highlight that time. It's a journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So these are very small differences. Actually, the pecans, when we run stats over there, it actually wasn't statistically different, going from the average of 1.8 to 2.2, but it is moving. If we probably would have measured another year or two, we probably would have got statistically different. But you can see from the measurements, it is starting to increase. The row crops, they did statistically increase because we went from 0.6 to 0.9, and it is still continuing to increase. Them projects have been continued on. Just diving a little bit deeper into the soil microbes. So like I mentioned earlier, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, archaea, viruses make up that living fraction. So they're important because bacteria break down or make nutrients available in the root zone. So I had AI kind of help me draw some images because I'm not the best artist. And so, it's important for nitrogen fixation, promote plant growth, decompose the organic content, your roots, your leaves, and all that other stuff, and then make nutrients available to them later on. And then there's also fungi. So a lot of times people hear bad fungi and stuff like that. And so that's why I wanted to kind of highlight there is good fungi. There's saprophytic feeding fungi that feed on organic matter. They break cellulose down to cellulose. So they're breaking down into different fractions to help, make nutrients become available, changing plant leaves from that bigger leaf down to smaller particles and smaller particles. And so it works its way through these different food chains, microbial food chains, to become that nutrients that becomes eventually available to your plants later on. And so we do need fungi and bacteria together. So sometimes you'll see some soil tests that show you the composition. They'll have a little circle diagram, and then they'll have bacteria, fungi, and you'll see all these different components up there. That's why they're going to have all them different components when you send in that analysis from the PLFAs is the test that a lot of times you'll see done. And you'll see these little circle diagram, and you'll see some bacteria, fungi, and you'll see these different populations. So you need all the fungi populations, you need a balance between them, but you do need both of them. Also, a fun thing about fungal hyphae is when they link together, they can work like little arms. They can help reach out and get some of the nutrients and bring them back to your plants. So your roots don't always have to make it all the way there. So that's another little fun thing they can be doing out there in the soil. Now, when you start thinking about microbes in the soil, a lot of times, I'll get back to it. So a lot of the times it's found in the root rhizosphere. And so your nutrients, they need to be near the plants for the plants to uptake it. So we always, that's why we a lot of times apply our nutrients super close to the plant roots, because if not by the plant roots, the plants can't take them up. Microbes are also going to hang out closest to the plants because there's that exchange relationship between the roots and the soil and breaking things down and everything. So that's where that community has to live by, because that's what it's supporting. They're important with enzymes and releasing and exchanging that for nutrients and enzymes. They go kind of a mutualistic relationship between the microbes and the plants can occur. Protozoa are also out there, and so a lot of times we don't think about them, but they eat bacteria that release the nutrients that they take up to become available to the plants. Forgot I was going through my sequence. Forgot to mention protozoa. So a lot of the work I like to measure too is the physical changes. Like I mentioned, this is the hardest one to change over time. It's going to take a little bit of time. So what I do is I go out there and put these little metal rings in the ground. I hammer them in. I dig them around them. I dig them out. I lift them up, preserve the actual structure. We measure how well the water moves through it, how much water is holding onto it, and then we figure out how much soil was in that volume, which is known as the bulk density. So that way we know if we're increasing our water infiltration, our water holding capacity, and then we'll also take a subsample out of there to measure how much aggregate stability there is, and that's how well the soil particles are staying held together. So here's a fun little demo, and so didn't bring the thing out here today, but I took some photos of it. So on the left-hand side, we have a conventional, this would be a tilled area in a field. On the right-hand side, we switched to a no-till practice, and we switched to adding cover crops. And so we have the little bend you can kind of see in the middle part right here. So the middle part on there, and so the little bit in the middle sets up on top of it. We put water in. We give each one of them, the left one and the right one, the same amount of water. And so that water can either come off the little flute there that's off the end of it, and the water can run off, or it can go through. Which one do you think has more water infiltration, the one on the right or the one on the left? The one on the right. And so the one with the cover crop. And so you guys are probably familiar with these kind of things. And so right here, we poured the same amount of water on it. Most of the water on the tilled one ran off, and then you can see at the bottom of the container there's some soil that got taken away with it too. The one on the right-hand side, the water went through. A lot of people kind of notice the water's got a little bit of soil in it. That's just because I cut a little bit of soil, and I don't have a screen that's very good on the bottom, so when the water does run through, it does take it a little bit out because we basically just introduced a 1-inch rainfall on there. And so, but you can see even in that 1-inch rainfall that it's clean. It took a few little grass particles that broke off during that rain, moved it in there. But the water that moved underneath the soil, that's nothing to worry about. That'd be normal. Like you'd normally have soil underneath there. It wouldn't actually move out. And so underneath there, that's just kind of a note right there where you see that little tannish soil from the water underneath. Not a big deal. That's actually would have stayed in place. That's just because I had to cut it, physically disturb it to make that diagram. I just want to note that because sometimes people say, oh, what happened there? And I was like, it's just a product of me having to go in there and physically cut this out of the ground in order to bring that demonstration to life. So we're back to some of my hand drawing art here. So this is kind of science of what's going on there. So they're laid over top of the exact same spot. So you can think of all of them are particles. And so where you see this kind of look what looks like just a different paint. So I splattered a whole bunch of different particles of soil up there. So when the water hit the soil, it hit it and then ran off and took little soil particles with it. Very little found its way through. And so you can see that little narrow channel of the blue. And then when it actually got into good aggregation, so this is, microscopic view once again. So you can see when the water actually tried to move through, once it got down below the soil surface, it was able to move through. But that disturbed area that had no aggregate stability, the water had a hard time and it hit the soil and it just ran off and went into the ditches, taking some of that soil particles with it. Where the one on the right, when you had the cover crops, so you'd have roots going in there. I didn't draw the roots in there, but we just want to show the aggregates. And so the water hit it. It didn't have an issue with going in because it had good structure. And so the water was able to move throughout the soil pretty consistently and make its way down. So here's a real life example. So this is just over the border in Georgia in a cotton field. So on the left-hand side, we have no cover crop. Everything else is kept the same. On the right-hand side, they introduced a cover crop. And so we put this little spring out there. We poured blue dye like you'd put in a pond to find for leaks or whatever that, if you had that going on, if you have leak issues. So, we just put that blue dye out there to help check. And then we added water. So we simulated a rainfall event. That orange flag on the left-hand side is 4 inches. So you can see the water moved down there and concentrated overnight and then didn't move down below. And so this is a clean area that I didn't get any of the blue dye on the shovel. On the right-hand side, my orange flag fell off before I got this photo, but the end of that thing is 4 inches. That water is moving down about 6 or 8 inches. You can also see it's kind of wavy, so it is working its way down and moving, where the other one hit a hard pan and just kind of sat there. So this is introduction of a cover crop, just showing a real-world infield example. This is on sandy soils. That'd be pretty much the exact same sandy soils as we find in South Alabama, and some a little bit around here, just showing how water movement on a real-world example using cover crops versus no cover crops. In reality, this was a test where we had cover crops and no cover crops. These two photos are less than 10 feet from each other because we had cover crop, no cover crop. So it's not like these are two different fields, two different areas. When I say they get the same production, they are the same production. They got harvested with the same combines. They got planted with the same things. The only difference is we had strips of cover crop planted versus no. So chemical. And so one of the things I work on, so you mentioned that some of my research seen it. So like I have it at all these research stations scattered across the state of Alabama, is I like to study sulfur and sulfur in the soil and how it's cycling. And the reason why I study sulfur is because it's heavily tied to organic matter. They estimate somewhere between 40 is the lowest estimation I've seen. 95 is the highest estimation we've seen of sulfur stored in the organic content. So your organic matter is a very important source of sulfur. So a lot of times our crops are low in sulfur. Back in the Clean Air Act that started in the 70s, we started reducing the sulfur in the environment. It's been taken out of our gasoline, low sulfur diesels. Our factories have scrubbers and everything like that. So that sulfur that was free, if you want to call it that was coming out of the factories and the gasolines and stuff like that, them deposits have been reducing over time since the 70s. And over the last, I got the slide here. So over the last 20 some years, it's greatly reduced. And so you can see a lot of the industrial region had heavy sulfur deposition. So this is kilograms of sulfur per hectare. Ideally, we'd be in the red if we were depositing. Obviously, this is coming from acid rain deposits, not the deposits we would want. But so when we were in the red, we were actually getting probably enough sulfur. We were getting that 18, so it roughly converts to pounds. So we're getting that 18 to 20 pounds. That's what probably about most crops will need in that 18 to 20 pounds. Some crops have different nutritional needs, so it will vary a little bit. But we were getting that 18 to 20 in 2000. And so now you look at 2019 to 2021, we're not getting them acid rain events with that sulfur in the soil. So we're not getting that atmospheric deposition that's shown here in the cycle with the cloud and the rainfall. Our plant residues are cycling as they always have been. Animal manure is one way to introduce sulfur into the system. Manures do have sulfur in it, so that's a good way to get some sulfur in there. Commonly, we're adding sulfur, but the problem with elemental sulfur is when you put it in the soil, it takes a long time to break down. You need microbes to help convert it over into the sulfate fraction to make it available to the plants. It's going to take a time. It's not going to be immediately available to plant. It's going to be a little bit longer term. So a lot of people aren't using that form. Ammonium sulfate, AMS, is a mineral fertilizer that will go straight into the sulfate form. It'll be immediately available to your plants. It works really well at getting it straight into the plant right away. The organic fraction does take a little bit of time to convert over, but a lot of my research is figuring out how fast that conversion time is happening here in Alabama. A lot of that's been studied in the Midwest. They do it with soybeans, and I study a lot of row crops and stuff like that, and systems like how can we reduce inputs and look at how much is available. So some of the different systems we've noticed from measuring sulfur is measuring sulfur, in February versus measuring the sulfur in the soil in May or June. Like I mentioned, the microbes get warm, they get happy. So there's a sulfur enzyme that helps break down, make it available. Some sulfur enzymes made it happy and available. More sulfur is showing up in that sulfate fraction, which is the fraction we're soil testing. So when we do soil testing, we measure the plant available form. We don't always measure the total form because that's what we care about is what's available to the plant at that time, what's available. Now, some of it can mineralize, and so we've noticed with the mineralization process that sulfur will become more available throughout the summer time. That'll be there as that organic matter breaks down a little bit from the microbes, it becomes available to the plant. We could probably supply a lot of our sulfur we need. I'm currently studying how much sulfur do we have in the fuel tank is the way I like to describe it. How much sulfur is in the fuel tank versus how much is actually in the line making it to the plants. So we're doing a lot of extensive studying on that and how much is needed and coming up with the preseason recommendations. I started with main row crops immediately. Winter wheat, corn, cotton, soybeans. We're studying the relationships with that first. The next phases that will go into place in the next couple of years, we'll be looking at some additional vegetable crops and some Bahia grass and Bermuda grass, some forage systems. Like I said, I work in multiple systems. We just started with one system right away, and then we're going to slowly integrate it in more. I want to see how the soil is responding and how everything's acting, because once we know how fast it's moving in the soil naturally and how everything's kind of fluctuating, we can provide a little bit more information on rates of conversion and stuff like that, so surveying it. So switching back into methods to build organic matter. So that's why I was talking about sulfur, because it's in the organic matter. If you have good organic matter content, you probably don't need to worry about your sulfur as much. But since our organic matter content may be not where we want it, we need to look at other ways to add sulfur in there. Could be through organic components. One of the ways to build organic matter is through planting cover crops. And so this little board right here is one of the ones I used up in North Dakota. And so this was cover crops after about 40 days. And so sometimes people are like, oh, I planted my cover crop too late. It frosted, it died. It wasn't worth my time. I don't think it was worth my investment. And so I like to illustrate this. So these plants are somewhere between, the shortest plant there is crimson clover, or camelina actually, winter camelina, and only made about 4 inches tall. The clover is about 4 or 5 inches tall. The grasses only made it to about 8 inches tall before we terminated them. And so they actually got frost damages. I didn't terminate them. The frost terminated them. They weren't cold hardy enough crops. Except for the cereal rye was still trying to hang on. But what we noticed is that about 6 or 8 inches above ground, it's the iceberg principle. You got 20 to 30 inches below ground. So sometimes people are like, oh, I got this little sparse stand. It's only 6 inches tall. It wasn't as productive as I would hope. Yeah, maybe it wasn't as productive as you hoped, but you actually got a lot of good benefit down below the surface. So you had them roots. Them roots are going to die and break down, be food for the microbes. They're doing that stuff. They're working their way through. They're creating them pore channels for water to move in. Some roots below ground were actually doing a lot of great work. You just maybe don't see it as much. And so it's kind of it's that iceberg thing. And so you don't notice as much. So even though sometimes you feel like you didn't have a success with your cover crop, you probably were more successful than you realized. It's just a lot of them changes take time. So maybe you're like measuring your organic content. You're like, well, I didn't have a success with very good cover crop for 3 years in a row. My organic matter didn't really move. It probably moved slightly. It's just hard to notice it sometimes because it's going to take you a little bit of time to build it. A lot of my PhD work focused on perennial cover crops, which is photo on the right-hand side. And I compared it to annual cover crops, which is photoed on the left-hand side. And I worked with corn, cotton, and pecans was my more horticulture system. And so looking at different things like that. And so we've seen it in the pecan orchards and all that. I showed you some of the organic content building over time by using this perennial cover cropping system. So this is where we keep the cover cropping living year round. That's some of the demonstrations I'm setting up here in Alabama, is keeping that cover crop growing year round. You just terminate a strip back. Some people have used fire to terminate that strip back. Some people use strip tillage to terminate it back. Some people use herbicide to terminate it back. Some people plant into the middle of it. If they've got the right plant going into it and it's vigorous enough, it can outcompete the cover crop, the Durana white clover. So the Durana white clover, what happens is it slowly dies back throughout the summer. It doesn't like the heat that well. It's made to be grazed by cattle, so it can die back a little bit and it can recover as long as you keep a good balance. And so what it does when it dies back is it actually releases nutrients. So I worked with cotton for one study, and we noticed that it was releasing nutrients back in that July and August timeframe. Good time for cotton to have extra potassium. It had other nutrients. We just focused in solely on potassium for that paper when we were writing it. We measured all the nutrients, but potassium was my main focus. And so we noticed potassium was coming back available to the cotton at the right time. So that was a nice way of, we weren't adding extra potassium. So this study was coming out of, we put this system out there and we were measuring our potassium. Like I mentioned, that nutrient cycling. We were measuring it. We just had it out there. We were like, man, our potassium, we're putting the same amount. We have no cover crop. We noticed our potassium was increasing, but everyone was getting the same amount of potassium. So we set aside, we did a second study where we kept the potassium the same, but we ideally measured it with how much was in the water leaching below the soil, how much was in the soil, how much was in the cover crop, and how much was in the cotton. So that way we could understand the full dynamic of where that potassium was and where it was moving and when it was moving. We noticed it was showing up in that August time frame when that cotton was happy and really needing it to finish out its yield. It would work in other crops too. It was working in the pecans because that grower noticed his zinc needs. His zincs in his leaf was increasing. Zinc's very important to get good nut production in pecans. And so he noticed his zinc was going up and he wasn't having to buy as much extra zinc. So that's another story tell of the using cover crops in the system. Annual cover crops can be beneficial, perennial. The idea with it, I didn't start the idea, it's been around for years, but the idea with it was if we can get a little bit of good out of small part of the year being used to cover crops, let's increase the amount of time. So it increases the amount of time it works for us and see if it can actually increase. And it's worked pretty well. It does have challenges. I'm not gonna say it doesn't. It does take a little bit of a learning curve on learning how to work with it. But that's why we're setting up trials here in Alabama to understand a little bit some of the dynamics of Alabama soils and how it's gonna work for there. Annual species with diversification, introduction of cattle is a great thing. And even if you can't get the livestock or chickens or cows or goats or something mixed in there, just adding different plant species. If you're originally going to go monoculture cover crop, put 2 or 3 things in there. I don't tend to go too crazy on my cover crop mix. I keep it fairly simple. I like a cool season grass. I like a warm season grass, brassica, some kind, like a canola, rapeseed, something like that, daikon radish. And then I like a nitrogen fixing item, like a clover. And so I kind of keep a pretty simple mix there. But that way we have different things growing at different times. In this mix right here, you can really see the highlight of the Austrian winter pea climbing up the side of my warm season grass, which that year I decided it was going to be sorghum. So we have sorghum growing right there. We have Austrian winter pea. They're growing up. They're growing together. They were fixing nitrogen. They're covering the soil. And this is actually for a prevent plant study. So we had a prevent plant situation in a row crop field. Couldn't get it implanted in time. So we threw this out there as a mix. I actually have this replicated here in Alabama. This is in North Dakota. I have this replicated right now here in Alabama. And we're just trying to see if we can cover the soil, keep the soil in place, see if we can build a little bit of nutrients. So even though when you didn't have success at planting because you couldn't get it planted in time, putting something on that land, no matter whether it's a vegetable garden, a large scale, small scale operation, it doesn't matter. If you don't have even an area that's like, man, I didn't get my tomatoes in time, put something out there, keep the ground covered so you don't have your erosion. And then look at something that's a nitrogen builder, like an Austrian winter pea or something like that. It's going to fix a little bit of nitrogen. A legume species is what we call them. That can help get you a little bit of benefits. I like the sorghum because it's going to be deep, fine rooted. So it went down there and pulled the nutrients. We weren't going to harvest sorghum. We just put it back into the soil. So it pulled nutrients from down below. It died. It comes back into the organic matter fraction. It goes through that food chain like we were talking about. It makes the nutrients available. So that's a system where maybe didn't look like a success in terms of harvest, but we were able to get something out of what may have been a loss, and we just left it bare all season long. And like I mentioned earlier, reduced tillage methods and then tillage with a purpose. We understand tillage is needed for different situations, but have a reason to do it. Recreational tillage is what we joke about. If you're doing recreational tillage, you don't have a purpose, it's probably not going to help you. So, just tilling just to till. So that's what some people thought we were doing with that quad track out there. They thought we were just disturbing it just to disturb it. Why weren't you leaving the wheat stubble? We did it for a purpose. We wanted it to green up right afterwards. And the photo, I didn't transfer it over here, but the photo where it's green, so that thing was covered in green. We had a nice, beautiful cover crop a week later. This is from a textbook, and so just kind of highlighting some of about building our soil organic matter. So this is time in terms of, many, many years, hundreds of years. This isn't just, a 10, 20 year thing. So we have time 0 versus time 1. This is a native system undisturbed. And then we had many years of disturbed systems, Dust Bowl, that's what we're looking at right here. And then we have T2 starting. And so then you have the no-till where it starts to increase. And so you can see using no-till practices and reduced tillage practices, conservation tillage, what we call it, we start to see the organic matter start to build. Adding cover crops in there, that line would accelerate above that dark red line at the end. So just showing that it does take time to recover from systems like that when the carbon's not being sequestered. And then one final point. So here's that soil map where we're showing the Piedmont soils and the yellows and reds right there. Your green soils is going to be kind of more of your sandies and silty soils. And then your pink soils is your black belt prairie soils. That's going to be your heavy clays, that shrink swell clays, vertisol is what we call it. And so that's going to have a little bit different properties. So have realistic goals for each of the areas. They're not all going to be the same. So if someone's on a black belt soil versus someone's on a coastal plain soil versus a Piedmont soil, things aren't going to work at the same speeds. Some may work really well for one person while someone else is working as well, but you'll find things that are working well for each of you. And it's just going to take a little bit of time, a little bit of adjustments based on the systems. And then if you're going to go out there and sample and measure these changes over time, have a good consistent sample pattern, have a good consistent time of year. If you're like I mentioned, if you're measuring in May, keep that consistent. Measure in May every year. If you're measuring in February, doesn't matter. Just pick a time. Just be consistent with it. So that way you can measure your changes and see what you're doing out there is actually making changes. This is just a summary slide. Soil organic matter provides nutrient cycling, holds nutrients, it breaks down, releases nutrient, improves water movement into the soil and then through the soil. It cannot be quickly built, but it can be quickly lost. And then, when we're talking about loss and we're trying to build it back. So how much soil organic matter is out there in pounds? So if you take 6 inches of soil for 1 acre, that's 2 million pounds of soil, mathematical equation. So if you have 1% soil organic matter in the 2 million pounds, so 0.01, that's 20,000 pounds of soil organic matter that are out there in 1 acre of soil at 1% organic matter. Now, if you're adding 5 pounds out there of organic content, so that's what's getting returned back to soil. So that's 0.025. So divide that out. I showed the math down there. So you can see it's going to take you 0.025% increase. So that's why it's going to take a long time. I'm just trying to show you some math so that way you don't think it's going to increase. This is also only adding 5 pounds of organic content. You can multiply that out with different amounts and see how fast you can build your rates. And some of it is getting broke down. We're warm here in Alabama. We're humid. We got moisture. We have microbes that are happy. It's breaking down the organic matter. It's cycling it. It's moving it around. So it's going to fluctuate throughout the year. But I know sometimes people are like, I'll have 1% organic matter. I want to be 10 in the year. It's probably not super realistic. Actually, it's not realistic. What's what we show in the math right here. And so just kind of showing some mathematics here. It's a journey. It takes time. It can be done. This math showing it right here, just doing 5 pounds, slowly building it. It's just going to happen. Just going to take time. Here's my contact information. Thank you all for listening to me.
Got time for some questions. So that maybe spark some questions for you guys. I know we got this awesome panel over here, Auburn folks. I'm sure they may have some questions or comments. I have a question. That was a lot of information, a lot of things we should be doing, right? What's a couple of things you would say, okay, you've been doing it this way, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you want to make a change. So what would be your recommendation for the first couple of things to look at or first couple of things to implement as a grower? This could be a gardener, raised beds, landscaping. I mean, we're talking about the soil, right?
Yep.
So what would you say, or what would you recommend a couple of things? I'm recommending you're making this change. These are the first couple of things I would do.
So first couple of things to do is probably the first thing I would do is, go to the table, a kitchen table, whatever you sit at and think about it. So what is your end goal? Is your end goal, you want to increase productivity? You want to increase water movement into your soil? What is your limiting factor? If you're like, let's say, make up a situation. Let's say your water movement into your soil is really bad. You notice you have a lot of runoff. You want to change that. You're like, okay, I heard that if I increase my organic matter, I can get better water movement into my soil. So now you're like, okay, I want better water movement in the soil. That's my goal. How I'm going to do it is I'm going to increase my organic matter by using cover crops and no tillage mechanisms. So I always like to start with what my goal is and then work backwards to figure out what I want to do. Also, if you want to increase your nutrient cycling, organic matter, that's why I highlighted there, it's important to do that. So working on trying to change your organic content and improving your organic content is going to be connected back to a lot of the other properties like I was trying to highlight. And so I would say whatever your goal is, try to start increasing your organic content in your soil. That way, when you're putting out fertilizers or nutrients, the excess can be held onto that and then be released later on to your plants, whatever's extra out there. And that way it's not being leached below the soil or stuck on the sediment and then getting washed away. So building organic matter is the one easy goal, the one easy answer. But the practice you use to get there, it depends. That publication that I talked about at the beginning, it's available at Alabama Extension. It's called Principles to Practices. I do have a few copies in my truck I forgot to carry in. But it's called Principles to Practices. And so that's just kind of talking about just try to select one practice out there that works for you. Maybe integrating livestock works for me. My neighbor has some cows. He's looking for an extra acre to graze on it. I have a 2 little acre area. Once a year, I can let them graze on it for a couple of days. Maybe that's your first step you take. Maybe your first step is not tilling or going to a strip till, reduced till system. Maybe that's your first step. Maybe your first step is, I'm going to keep everything the same, but I'm going to go buy cover crop seed this year, and I'm going to put a blend of cover crops out there to fix a little nitrogen, build a little organic matter, have some deep roots to pull some nutrients up. So pick the one thing, but at the end of the day, it's kind of all connected back to organic content.
Question.
Yes.
About it, because I have some raised beds, that's what I bought, and raised beds, just keep adding more raised beds, trying to get rid of all the grass. But I have, in one area, I wanted to take it to more all perennial, so things like concrete, with building, and things that use my herbal plants. But that's what I'm kind of running into, is that, do I make them, I dig them up, so the concrete so big, and I guess I can separate it, so is that the best way to do it? Because I need to put more dirt in, because there's basically how even if it compacts down, and even if you take it and just kind of break it up, now we still need more dirt in. What's your recommendation on that? Just filling around it, or actually digging things up and then planting?
So yes. Yeah, so the question is so if we're in a raised bed situation and we're putting, compost and soil in there and it's slowly breaking down over time, it compacts slowly over time, do we need to dig them perennial plants back up, or do we just add more soil on top of it? What do we need to do to help, keep it at the same level? So you started with it, let's say 100% full, it slowly went down to maybe it's 75% full. Do we need to pull them plants out? Do we need to redo it all? What do we need to do to change it to help keep this, back at that 100% level where we would like it? I actually do raised bed gardening myself in Auburn, so I have tomatoes and mint working together. Not sure if that's the best combination. That's just a combination I've got going. So I have tomatoes and mint, and then fruit trees and vegetable trees, or not vegetable trees, but vegetable-ish. Olive, my vegetable trees. So I call them vegetables. I'm not really vegetable, but so I have raised beds for all of them, or container gardens is what a lot of times I'm working with. And so them are all established, and I actually took all mine from North Dakota and brought them down here. So now they moved from North Dakota down to here. And so what happens is I have the same situation going on with my tomatoes. And so it's slowly compacting. It's moving down over time. And so, yeah, you can go in there and break it up a little bit and lift it back up. But a lot of times that organic content is being broken down. And so your nutrients are cycling out and the plants are taking up the nutrients and it's going away. Different things are evolving and changing in there. So it's actually some of it's being broken away, being taken up by the plant matter and the residue that's moving away. So your vegetables and fruits that you're taking off of there, it's collecting some of them nutrients, some of them different things. So you're going to slowly move away. Things just break down. It's a natural part. So bringing in some additional compost on top of it. A lot of times I like to keep my stuff in place, but digging them up and replanting them can be another option if you want to stack it on top of there. The one issue you can run into is if you slowly work its way down and then you just keep building up in there, you can sometimes get it kind of compacted because you're watering over the same area. A lot of times it can get compacted. So sometimes breaking it up a little bit is that's where a good tillage with a purpose comes in. not disturb the roots too much, but kind of break it up a little bit. So that way you don't just end up with this heavy layer from everything pushing down. But you do have some natural things breaking down because you might be using manures or something like that, or leaves or old plant residue. And them cell structures are starting large and they're slowly breaking down at a microscopic scale. Collectively, that's a large volume. Over a couple of years, it's going to go down.
My weeds staying in the reservoir bed. I don't know
Yep.
about it.
Yeah, because it pulled all that plant residue. So like when you're removing items away, so even weeds or whatever, or even at the end of the season, let's say you cut your tomato stalks off and you took them somewhere else to build compost. Okay, that compost is good, but it needs to make its way back there. Otherwise, you're just removing items away and you need to get back in. Naturally, if you have high vegetable production or high fruit production, you're pulling a little bit away of something. That's just the nature of it because your whole system's enclosed in that container. And so it's pulling it away. It doesn't have as much opportunity to get some stuff down below.
I have another one. So the triangle is a really great visual because it's about balance, right? Creating balance in the soil to maximize biodiversity and maximize the nutrient opportunities for the plants to be productive. That's what this is all about, right? What are some signs or signals that you can see to make a diagnosis like something's out of balance? Whether it's leaf color, or we mentioned wilting or plant loss. I mean, these things are going to happen. We've got these stresses coming in, but as we're becoming more sensitive and more focused on soil health, what are some quick, easy things you would recommend to us as gardeners and growers? Like, that doesn't look right. What could be going on?
So simulating a field situation, we show up to an area, and so like I go around and make visits to different areas, and so let's say I come up to an area and the production's not doing super good in one area, and so it's diagnosing what is wrong with it, trying to figure it out. So a lot of the things we commonly have to look for is what is the culprit. So you become a soil detective, and so one of my students, he likes to call us the soil detective sometimes, and then we're out looking for insects. He calls us, there's a certain insect that's been pestering cotton plants and okra and stuff like that's new to the U.S. called the cotton jassid. He calls us cotton jassid hunters. So depending on what we're looking for that day, he likes to call us the hunters or the finders. And so we're always out there looking around for something. We're hunting, we're finding, we're trying to get clues or signals from what it is. So what a clue or signal, it's kind of hard to pinpoint it down to one thing. I know some of them here probably have seen different symptoms of different things. You know, we may show up to a field and it's going to be like, okay, it's a low area, it's wet, water's not moving off, the plants are kind of wilting, they got change in a leaf color. Might be more related to a disease. It's maybe got root rot or something going on. You know, we're looking for them different signs or symptoms. The shape of way the splotches on the leaves are, that can give indications to us. So without seeing a specific leaf, it's we're kind of diagnosing from the air a little bit. And so sometimes we do get texted photos of plants. What is wrong with this? And then we kind of have to play detective. A lot of times that's not super easy. I look at that photo, I kind of guess a little bit, and then I make a phone call. I have certain questions I go through. It's like, is it in a low area? Is it in a high area? How is your water movement? How is the compaction of the soil? Have you seen a lot more insect pickup lately? So if you have a lot of insects picking up coming in the area, is it insect damage? You know, are you near an area where you could be susceptible to herbicide drift or herbicide runoff? You know, if you're using herbicides yourself, what were you using last season? What is your crop last season versus what is your crop this season? You know, some of the products in peanut production that can be used, or some of the different crops, you know, what works in a peanut won't work for corn because they're different plants. You know, one will kill one, not kill the other, but if there's carryover, that could be a concern. If there's a drift, you know, your neighbor starts spraying something and all of a sudden it drifts over and takes out your crop. So are we looking for herbicide damage? Do we see, you know, vein pulling? That could be a herbicide issue. Or what do we see the leaves are doing? So splotchiness, also the pattern on the leaf, what part of the leaf, what part of the plant. So if you have an issue, please reach out to us, but take a picture of the leaf, but then note what part of the leaf it's on. Is it on the lower part of the plant? That could be a nitrogen deficiency. If it's on the top part of the plant, it's sulfur deficiency. They look the same. They're different locations because the mobility in the plant, sulfur and nitrogen are used for the same process in the plant. So in photosynthesis, if you don't have nitrogen, you can't do the whole photosynthesis process. You need the nitrogen there to do the full conversion. But if you don't have sulfur to combine together with it, you can't do the process also. So the location on the plant, even though they had the same issue, the location on the plant kind of gave us an indicator of which one it's going to be. You know, potassium is going to be in the upper part of the leaves because it's mobile. It's going to be burning on the outside, and then movement in the soil. So it's a burning on the outside, but also certain insects can cause burning on the outside. So hoppers can cause burning on the outside leaf. So it could be a hopper, could be nutrients. Kind of depends on what the plant looks like, what situation, what you're observing is going on around you. It's kind of working some of them possibilities. Could it be a herbicide drift? Could it be a new insect? Could it be a disease coming up? What is going on around you? So we do need the environmental context, location on the plant context, and also location in the landscape context. That helps us point out. Sorry, it's a little bit long-winded and random, but
Complex answer.
I was about to say, yeah, it's not super direct and easy to get for an A to B answer. That's part of being like an agronomist and trying to figure that solution out. You have a question? Yes.
What is your experience or understanding of the impact of the relationship between gray water systems and soil?
So gray water systems, you're talking like a septic system, like gray water, like hand washing water?
I'm from California, so water is an issue.
Yes.
So like gray water, like repurposing, household, sink.
Oh, yeah, gray water, yeah, from sink water and stuff like that. And so, yeah, and so like, you know, the black water would be like you have sewage in or whatever, and the gray water, sink water and stuff like that. Just make sure everyone's got the terminology we're going to work with here. So gray water, and so, you know, that can go in. So one of the things is we talk about, like when I was working with Georgia, is we worked with some of the lakes and stuff like up there. I worked a lot with the soil physics professor up there, and she worked a lot with different systems, and then water movement into lakes, kind of a lake like Lake Martin, but it's Lake Lanier, which is near Atlanta. So it's a big lake up there. And so we worked a lot in that system, and I would help out with some projects here and there. I was just more an extra set of hands and kind of learning the system. Wasn't the main focus of my work, but I kind of learned some different things. Some things we think about from like a gray water moving into the soil is soaps you're using. So if you have soaps that have, you know, heavy, you know, harsh things in it, or whatever soaps you're putting, whatever you're putting in that drain, make sure you know what's going in that drain, and make sure before you actually put it out in the soil that you actually know what's in there a little bit, and kind of keep a close eye on it. You know, we kind of worry about the phosphoruses and some of the soaps and the phosphates, some of the soaps getting into there, because now you're adding that into the system. You may not be intentionally thinking about it or knowledgeable what's going on, but kind of studying what you're putting into it and then moving out onto there. So using gray water can be used, just kind of knowing what it is to make sure you're not accidentally introducing something else into the system. Because if you're rinsing certain things into your gray water that's may not necessarily supposed to be in the gray water, that can contaminate the soil. But the soil is a natural system, so like a natural system, or you can build them, is like a bioswale, to where water can go in there, water can sit, it can remediate things out and let it leach out throughout and let the water move through there, and actually the soil can remediate itself and kind of work through that system. If you have some plants out there working through the different things, a lot of times call them bioswales, where it catches rain runoff. It's not gray water, but it's rain runoff, and catching that water runoff and kind of help accumulate some of the nutrients and sediments and different things and help retain it in the system. A little bit different answer with that, but like the gray water is, I don't work with a lot directly because I don't have a lot of calls on that, but knowing what's in it. So like some people are collecting from their house and then wanting to put it on their garden. Know what's in it. Make sure you're not accidentally introducing it. You know, if you put heavy Dawn dish soap in there and then you go out there and spread it on your garden, you're probably going to kill some things. That's just a natural thing. And so if you put vinegars or stuff like that, that can be harsh on plants too. So just kind of know what you have in there and then putting out there and making sure you have it the right dilution, so you're not accidentally putting too high concentration if you do have something in there.
So we had, before we put in our septic tank, our kitchen sink, gray water, we just had it like a French drain going to the ground to the backyard. So, you know, let's see. Yeah, just going to the ground, but we had, we were putting stuff, you know, in the sink, and, a lot of times, if it was vinegar or Dawn dish soap, something like that, you can see the grass would
Burn
Are you ready?
it would start
Ball.
turn colors, but we didn't have
Hey, honey.
exposed. But I think if we did, it would kind of work as like a kind of like a compost system. If you were to grind it up, if it was good, you know, good material, it could
keep
work as a compost.
Yeah, discussion about like, yeah, keeping the scraps and putting it in an area and then composting it down, and then the water or whatever, having that water go out there. But yeah, like the Dawn dish soap and vinegars and stuff like that can work as a natural weed killer a little bit. I don't know, natural quite the right word, but it can, work. If you're going to use that, you can maybe keep that in a container. If you're trying to kill something on like a driveway or something, put it out there and kill some different areas. But yeah, just cycling that water. I grew up on a septic system in Missouri, and so we had the water go in, and then it went out to a leach field, and so we had everything leaching out across the field, and then we harvested hay off of that field.
I've got one more question. This is okay. So I run 50-acre cattle pasture. We're doing cow-calf operation, and we got a lot of action. And I know you talk about cover crops because of action, because the roots make ways for the water to go through. What's something I can do? Could I like oversee the cover crop so that I wouldn't do much germination? I really want to.
You wouldn't always have to tell us. Sometimes you might have to scratch with a hair or whatever. So the question is kind of like, if we have a pasture situation, what kind of species is already living out there? Is it Bahia? Bahia clover fescue. Okay. So you're just trying to increase a little bit maybe the production. So some of them species, you got your grasses in there, your Bahias, you got your clovers that are fixing nitrogen. So the grass species are nice because they can pull nutrients from down below. They also have the fine roots. So the nice thing about fine roots is they can make them ways into the cracks a little bit easier. If you're using like a daikon radish, sometimes they have a hard time finding them little cracks because they're only just one plant, where the Bahia grass and stuff like that can help find their way into the ground a little bit easier. So you got a nice blend there. So I wouldn't necessarily always worry about changing unless you got like a heavy weed pressure, if you got something that's choking it out.
Yeah, the main thing is
water retention. So getting water in the land and then keeping the water in the soil is kind of your goal. And so when you have that compaction areas, sometimes we do like a subsurface subsoiler. And so we'll do a subsoiler and then we'll make sure we have a fresh, planting. So in the fall time, we'll put out our species of forages and then make sure them get good and established and kind of, rotate the cattle around. Another strategy is quicker rotational grazing. I know it's changing in systems and stuff like that. Some people don't do that, but what a lot of people I've worked with in North Dakota that were on water limited system is they would move things pretty quickly. And I've seen a few people in Alabama doing it, but not as much, where they move the cows from area to area. Visited a farmer south of Montgomery, actually, or rancher, I should say, south of Montgomery, and they kept moving the cows pretty quickly across the field. So every day they're moving into a new small paddock. Instead of the whole paddock, they just move it in small paddock, small paddock. They're only letting so much of the plant get chewed down, so that way the plant can have a little bit more opportunity to grow, puts more roots in the soil, helps alleviate some of them issues. So they took the land, got it all set, got a good plant species growing out there, and then just kept the cows moving across pretty quickly. So they used one hot wire and just, moved one hot wire in front of them, one hot wire behind them, and they had the standard fence on the sides, and they just moved them across the field and then circled them back around to the start and just kept rotating them. So that way the plant species had a little bit more time to recover. They have more time to recover to get above ground biomass. They're going to get more below ground biomass and start changing their system. So to be honest, they're on black belt soil, which already had pretty high carbon. So I don't know. We don't have beginning measurements. They weren't measuring the organic matter. It's a starting system. We're measuring organic matter on a new paddock to see, but it's high organic content already. To be honest, I pulled some soil probes, soil to kind of know my history of what's going on out there. I was looking for depth of different things and how much organic content was in there. And so we were trying to estimate it a little bit, but it's a lot of kind of not perfect knowledge because we didn't have a starting sample and an ending sample. We're just kind of comparing two different areas and they weren't 100% treated equal. So we don't know for sure what's the system, but yeah, it was an increase in their carbon. They did notice a reduction in weed systems. They do have a good stand. So they're shifting that practice over to another area because the production of the grass is higher. They were trying to get more livestock per acre and what that looked like in their system. So they were working that way to that system. Yes. Yes.
So I've done a cut and trough and I have 2 years worth of data with PLFA analysis. And so one question that I have, so the basis of our experiment is testing cotton varieties in a nematode infested and non-infested field. That same test I talked about. Yep. So the purpose of the PLFA is to kind of figure out, like, if we have this problem of infestation, is there a way for us to kind of, move around that and still keep like profitable yields? So soil organic matter is like a long-term process, right?
Yep.
But if we have a low diversity in our functional groups in the soil, what's, I guess, the second best way to change that and kind of maintain good yield? Obviously, you know, the pathogen is in the soil. So, you know, we have our management for that. But in addition to that, something to supplement like profitable yields or a healthier soil, what would be runner-up, I guess, to soil organic matter?
So the question is, so if we're in a cotton system and we have nematodes present, we're trying to increase our organic content, how do we, well, not, besides changing our organic content, how do we change it to help, you know, change the PLFAs? And so just for PLFA, so that's phospholipid fatty acids. That's what that abbreviation stands for, just so everyone knows. And that's going to show us our functional groups of different microbes that are kind of in the soil's simplest way. And so how do we modify that? And so we increase that diversity. So if we're only having a couple different functional groups, how do we increase the diversity? So how do we increase them more? So that's why I kind of said it's part of my answer in the question there, but organic content. So how do we do that in a way? How do we get there? So organic content is going to take time. We're going to make them little changes first. So what's that little change we're going to make first? So cover cropping would be one solution. So you can still keep your same tillage, but adding cover crops in there. And so what would the cover crop be? So if you're in a cotton system with nematodes, you got to start thinking about, okay, nematodes can host on stuff. So if you have clovers out there, they're probably going to host on it. So while it's fixing nitrogen, it can be doing great things, but you got nematodes, you're probably going to host it on there. It's not really going to benefit because you're going to end up increasing your population because you're just giving them something else to feed on, waiting for your cotton to come back. Now, long-term species rotations in terms of like cotton, corn, soybeans, you know, you could put a couple different crops in there and help distance. You know, some people do an actual like sod-based rotation in there. They increase their length of time between there. Seen it in Florida, some in Alabama, but more in either sandy soils or drier systems like out west in Kansas, Oklahoma. So having that rotation in there, so you can increase your rotations from your cash crop standpoint, what you're doing to lengthen the time, so that way you get your nematode population to go down by putting, you know, let's say Bahia grass out there for several years and then switch back to cotton. So that could lengthen your time. I know it's a long time there, but another thing is putting them winter cover crops, your annual cover crops, putting in the fall, making sure it's not hosting it. So cotton producer went and visited one of their fields, and so they had that same concern too, was we like cover crops. Here's our blend. They had a 5-way blend, but we don't like the nematodes. So once we get nematodes on the field, we have to quit doing cotton. So they switched to doing a grass species and different things, and they switch it for a couple of years, and then they switch back. They wait for the population to get low, but they would like to stop that cycle. And so they're cover cropping, but their cover crop's not doing so well because they got nematode issues. So how do they look at it? So we sat down, we found species of cover crops that weren't going to build it. So no-till system, putting on a cover crop that won't host it. So in that situation, it was black oats, and then canola was going out there, a little bit of canola. And then we're just been resistant varieties because we had resistant varieties of different things. And so canola and then black oats. And they had 2 other species, but they cut the clover, which is normal in their mix. They cut anything that was going to be a host for that specific. I can't remember if they had reniform or which version. They had one version, I can't remember, but they cut back the host. So they used annual cover crops, no till, kept cotton out of there for 2 years, and then went back to cotton on the 3rd, which was not their normal rotation, but they got their population low, they got it manageable, and they, you know, circled back around. So that's one way. So they increased their species diversification by adding different food sources because they had different cover crops in the blend. They also altered their cash crop rotation by adding, maybe been wheat. They added in there, like maybe wheat, soy, and something. They added like a new crop, and I can't remember what the 3rd one. It went corn, and they added something else into the rotation that wasn't normal, but helped lengthen that time, reduce the population of the nematodes, but also added species diversification. So basically, they just gave it a whole bunch of different, so it's like a buffet. They had all the different cover crops. They had different cover crop species that maybe they didn't normally have before. They added different cash crops in there, which is adding different foods. And so they were just trying to change the buffet so they had different foods so they could encourage different micropopulations. So I guess shortest answer of that is species diversification, both through your cover crop and your cash crop.
No, yeah, I was just asking because like I'm in like literature search, I'm kind of familiar with like the roles of each functional group. What I'm not familiar with is how to specifically enhance those functional groups. That's what I was asking. Again.
Yeah, so
like increase diversity correctly. So that was a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Basically, it's giving them different food, and then you can support different populations. Making sure you have the soil moisture out there too, because if you don't have soil moisture, all living things need some water. So if you don't have the water, that's going to be an issue. So if you don't get the water, so slowly all ties back to organic content because eventually you're going to increase your organic matter by doing all these things. So that's why it's a good indicator. While you're measuring PLFAs and that's your quick change, if you're doing all the practices, you're going to see your organic matter changing too. I just know a lot of producers will shy away from PLFAs because at a commercial lab that can be almost $100 a sample, where organic content is, sub $10 or $20, sub $20. So that's why I a lot of times recommend organic matter. It's a little more affordable. But PLFAs are great. Not saying they're not. I do them. I just understand the financial side of that. Yes.
One more question. I got a burning question. There's always, you can discuss this over lunch, so good cause. All right. Thank you, Chandler. Appreciate the question and interaction. A couple of things. We will meet here at Newater on September the 3rd. Shane Harris, Ag Extension agent, is going to be here. We're trying to figure out his topic, but it will be pertinent, I'm sure. He gave me a blank check and said, "I'll talk on whatever you want me to talk about." I don't know if he can talk about it, but he's just kidding. But September the 3rd here with Shane Harris. We're working hard for a November speaker to be in the spirits industry and its relation to agriculture. So that will be a historic conversation as well as a very current conversation. So hopefully Bill and I are working on that one, so that would be kind of cool. October's to be determined, but I do need you to save a date, February the 10th and 11th of 2027. It's our first annual, hopefully it's annual, regenerative conference here at Newater for the love of soil. And so there'll be a documentary screening on the 10th and Wednesday evening, and Thursday is a day-long 9 to 3 conference with topics of soil and food. So there'll be more information coming up about February the 11th. So just kind of put that on your radar. With that, one thing we like to say here is that everything has to eat. All bugs, species, everything's got to eat. So we're now at the time, it's time to eat. And Bill wants to say 3 words to everybody.
Right. Also, how they're going back to 1898 when we
yeah, so Southern Preparatory Academy over in Camp Hill, so 18 minutes down the road from here. One of our partners, and they meet the 3rd Thursday of each month. We meet the 1st Thursday every month, and they are doing some contextual things there. It's not a repeat of this. Last month was a great presentation on composting and what they're doing, and all that's integrated into what they're doing with the school to return it back to how they started in 1898 with Dr. Lyman T. Ward and working with Booker T. Washington. And that's a skills development, mostly around agriculture. So they're rebuilding that. They've got, and Noah's spoken over there as well, tied to Tuskegee. So there's this great groundswell of things happening around this part of our state and our country around returning to some good, healthy ways to look at sustainability of agriculture and building resilient communities. So we're all working together in that regard. But the first Thursday's here, the 3rd Thursday's at Southern Prep over in Camp Hill on this topic of regenerative agriculture and build resilient communities. But that ain't to cover it. Yeah. So, but I want to introduce this Leo Walter. He is our assistant farm manager, and we added chef to his title. So he's prepared lunch for us today. And you might tell us what we're eating, and then say a blessing, and then we can dismiss for lunch.
I encourage the should be good. Everything second rice should be good.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us on the Zoom. Hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and we're going to break now and finish our day by gathering around the table. You guys take care.
Thank you, Dr. Brandon. Have a great day. You guys did amazing.
All right, for those of you on the Zoom with me, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at 360livingsoil@gmail.com.
Allie, be sure you make us available what your recording is so we can watch it again.
Absolutely, I'll have that uploaded today.
All right,
We'll
well,
send out
you
email.
need to, you'll Bill Roten or somebody the address.
Okay, I will make sure it gets out to the team and that they send it out to you.
Thank you much. Appreciate
Thank you
you.
so much. Bless you all. You have a wonderful day.